you're still watching the Entrepreneurial SME, and we're discussing the impact of high interest rates on small businesses. My guest is Duma Gqubule, a financial journalist and analyst. Share your thoughts on our socials using the hashtag TESME. Duma, I left you hanging there on a very spirited matter, I think, on your part. And I wanted us to get into that part that says, is there a better way of funding SMEs and ring-fencing them from the way we fund other big companies that can afford, that can carry the interest rates?
Yes, and that's a very good question, because SMEs, depending on which research you're talking about, they contribute about a third to GDP and maybe half of employment. But now the support that the government gives to large businesses through industrial policies, it's way in excess into what they give to small businesses, which are the ones that are supposed to create the jobs in the NDP. So what I've been saying is that, yes, number one, obviously, finance is the first one, obviously access to markets and obviously access and things like that. But on the finance one, which is what I focus on, is that there's completely inadequate access to finance. Let's start, I've talked about the development finance institutions, which the Reserve Bank can and should capitalize to provide more. The banks, as I said to you before we shut, we're not dealing with a normal risk aversion. We're dealing with racism from the banks, because the banks had a guarantee during COVID, 200 loan guarantee from the Reserve Bank, and they still refused to lend. And the government on its side didn't provide a requirement to lend to black SMEs, because that is where the market failure is. They said you can lend to all SMEs, but they only provided lending of 18 billion rands. And I would guess that the majority of that didn't go to black SMEs, it went to white-owned SMEs. So what I'm trying to say is that we're dealing not with risk aversion, which is everywhere in the world, we're dealing with racism. So government, there's a financial sector charter, the banks are used to reporting on black SME financing, and the government must put a quota of annual lending to SMEs. Because I used to do this as a hobby, phone the 4 banks, now there's 5 Capitec, and say, how much did you lend to SMEs last year? And my bank, which I will not name, they only lent 500 million rands to all SMEs, which is a scandal. So I'm just saying, I believe that we have to get serious about transforming this economy, and you have to do like what countries in Asia did, where they had quotas for lending towards developmental. We need a developmental central bank that will drive the economy and achieve much more than just reducing inflation.
And again, I'm going to go back to the banks, but I want to go back to DFIs because you mentioned them.
Yeah.
Historically, the IDC has always, paid a dividend to government. It has done well. It did well on its own. It didn't need to get money from government. Shouldn't that be the money that recapitalizes other DFIs, the money that they get from an IDC to make sure that this funds SMEs, black SMEs in particular, as you say?
Yes. So the IDC, I was looking the other day, the IDC lends mostly your larger businesses, the industrial policy, and some of that goes towards black-owned businesses, So I think we must focus on black-owned businesses. If you read the IDC's annual report, it's very difficult to tell how much actually goes to black-owned. I think it's about a third, because they're hiding it behind black-owned and black influenced companies, but the IDC, the CIFA is a subsidiary of the IDC, and the idea was that the IDC would subsidize CIFA, but I haven't seen any cross-subsidization if you look at it that way. Yeah.
Then let's go to the banks that you're passionate about. Could it be that if they were required to have a softer lending rate for SMEs, that would be their contribution to development and transformation?
Yes. So what the government could do and should do, we should have differential interest rates. You should have interest rates, for consumer spending, like your credit card, it should be higher. And then that's what they did in Asia, by the way. And then interest rates for productive sectors must be much lower. So like the cars, consumer spending higher, but for the ones that create job, they must have a lower interest rates. And then the one for black SMEs, who are the ones who suffer more than anybody else, the interest rate, the window that the central bank provides must be much lower. There's no reason, Rams, why that window at the central bank can't be 1% or 2%. And then they put a margin of 2% or 3%. So the Reserve Bank can do those type of things and that's what they should do. And we should also, I believe, have a housing bank, and, a housing bank because I think the government could, those are the type of innovations that we should have, yeah.
So that would soften the blow, but the other question would be, is it possible then for government to play a guarantor for SMEs when they loan from commercial banks?
Yes, they did that for the Reserve Bank did that during COVID, but then there were no conditions on the lending. So you have to give them the guarantee and then put conditions as to targets on how much you must lend. So then it becomes their problem, not the government's problem. But I think this COVID guarantee, the government is trying to redo it, with a voluntary mechanism, but there must be a stick and a carrot. Tina, we just had a carrot, which was the guarantee and the low interest. There wasn't a low interest rate guarantee, but it was a guarantee, but it didn't have the low interest rate. So we should have two carrots. It must be the lower interest rates and the guarantee from the government, and then on the side, the stick must be the targets for lending to Black-owned SMEs. And I think that is the solution. And by the way, I've been calling Treasury for a couple of months. This bounce back scheme of yours, how many Black people have taken out these loans? They can't provide me with an answer. I've been sending emails upon emails, talking to them about penduli. Yeah.
One last question. So that we don't treat SMEs as little children who can't take care of themselves, what do they need to do on their part to obviate these high interest rates and these difficult conditions? And I only have 30 seconds. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a very different. Yeah. Obviously, like with the high interest rates, it's a very difficult one, Rams, because most of them don't have access to finance. But if you do have access to finance, you must find a way that, everything must last longer, in your business and so forth. I'm not sure what you should do because our interest rates are so punitive, Rams, yeah.
Well, thank you, Duma. We had invited, by the way, banks to participate, but they couldn't join us. And unfortunately, we were only stuck with Duma. And that's all we have for tonight on the Entrepreneurial SME. From me, Rams Mabote, goodbye and God bless.